his talk this afternoon, in fact, follows on very nicely from the talk that we had just last month from John Fraser. Those of you who were able to attend John's talk raised the question of whether, when we look at the phenomena that we in the English-speaking world for the last 147 years have called the poltergeist, it also could be the same phenomena which is reported in Latin America under the name of duende or elf or goblin, and also in Romania, known variously by folk and colloquial names, but coming through to us most commonly known as the vampire. And with reference to a number of his own investigations over the years, John was talking about whether there could, in fact, instead of being diverse phenomena, actually be a peculiar situation that we could all be dealing with one and the same, and that the poltergeist may have many different angles. The Ghost Club has a long history in poltergeist investigation. Harry Price, who of course revived the Ghost Club back in 1938, wrote an entire book called Poltergeist Over England, and was very much responsible for promoting the idea of the poltergeist in the Western world at a time when many parapsychologists, psychical researchers remained somewhat skeptical. Since then, over the years, we've had people such as Maurice Grosse, Guy Playfair, and a whole succession of other researchers who picked up on actual poltergeist cases and investigated them to accumulate what is now, I think, a substantial body of evidence that increasingly cannot be ignored either by other psychical researchers or even by mainstream science. Over the years, of course, you'll be aware that there are many competing theories, and I remember one of the last conversations I had with the late Guy Playfair in January 2018, when he said to me that after 45 years of studying the phenomena, he was still unsure of the nature behind it. And he looked particularly to long-running poltergeist cases, which do not fit the long-established stereotype of the adolescent, the troubled teenager, which has become known certainly not only amongst psychical researchers, but in popular culture as well, though quite often with a great deal of exaggeration. There are much harder to fit into that idea of the troubled adolescent or teenager are the longer running cases. And that's the matter that Dr. Sugg is going to be looking at with context to his own research and a remarkable case called which is entitled the Keith Linder case. So without further ado, further introduction, may I hand over please to Dr. Richard Sugg.
Many thanks for a very interesting introduction, and also to Rob for organising this. If anything can frighten me more than poltergeist, it's trying to use Zoom in the way that he's managing to do. So this is a wonderful opportunity to talk to many people about, a case which really was a learning curve for me. Just a few seconds introduction on my involvement with all this. For anyone who doesn't know it, I was happily minding my own business, studying vampire, and what's been said about John Fraser, back in about 2012 for a book on vampires. I could make sense of everything vampire was supposed to do, except the poltergeist stuff, and I didn't really know what a poltergeist was. So I started looking this up and found it made my head hurt more than anything, including Lacan and Derrida in the old days. And I cast my mind back through all this to my old lecturer at A-level, who in about 1989, I think, told all the class a poltergeist story from his own early 20s, which went on for months and months. And just to put in context, I suppose, my initial ignorance of all of this, skepticism, agnosticism, I spent, how long, let me think, over 20 years neither believing nor disbelieving what this very hard-headed, mundane, trustworthy lecturer Mike had told me. So I took my time to come round to an interest in the study of this. I was agnostic, atheist through all of my childhood. I had my extremely valuable 10p pocket money docked for refusing to go to church at age 10. In context, that was a good bar of chocolate in those days. And I would say I remain agnostic, and I think what you said about Playfair just now I find very valuable, that one of the hardest things in the world is to not be certain about things. And I think some of the most damaging things that have happened in the world and are still happening are from the desire to be absolutely certain about life, the universe, the cosmos, the future, salvation. And I have to say that this case challenged me in what I thought I knew, where I thought I'd put the boxes together, having initially got my head around the poltergeist as something that looked like a very weird personal physics of traumatized RSPK. I spent a lot of time not listening to close friends telling me about their ghost stories, and finally got my head around those and began to take the ghost angle seriously. But I'd have to say still, I have no agenda about demons. I have no agenda about Christianity, any particular salvation in all of this. So into Keith's story, the Bothell Hell House, a new house. I think it was about 10 years old when Keith moved in Seattle. And a quick prelude on this, it was noted by a neighbour to Keith when he moved in that the house didn't keep tenants. I think it had perhaps 5 sets of rental residents before Keith turned up. Now, one of these with whom Keith made contact much later, I'm compressing a very big and a very tragic story here out of necessity, was a woman called Rhonda. And she had a very difficult life generally, aside from the house. She had a child with a very rare form of meningitis. The child saw shadowy figures all around the house. And Rhonda suffered very difficult mental health problems on and off. And ultimately, she actually committed suicide. You might know that Keith dedicates the book to Rhonda. Now, just one incident among an awful lot that must have happened to her. She was in the care of the child, who was at this point a baby. She was heating up milk on the stove for the child, and she went outside through a sliding glass door to have a cigarette with the milk heating on the stove. The door slammed shut. She tried to grab it. It was locked. The child was in the house as a baby, and she, after some frantic attempts with the door, simply smashed the glass to get back in and stop the child potentially being burned to death. So just one little prelude from the previous narrative of this house. Keith, age 42, and in no way typical poltergeist agent, one of the most laid-back people I've ever met, and incredibly stoical and courageous through all the horrors of this very long-running case. Had no experience of poltergeist, ghosts, didn't even really know what a poltergeist was, and in May 2012 moved in to live with his then girlfriend Tina. She was 43, for the first time, feeling very happy, very jubilant. They've signed the papers with the landlord. He's left them a bottle of wine, and they're in the front room, laughing, joking, in good mood. And they suddenly hear, appropriately that was me, I wasn't actually acting that part, just came, a child cough. It sounds like a child coughing, and it sounds like it's upstairs. They both hear it. They look at each other. They've got no context for any of this. They don't get particularly spooked by it, but the memory is to come back to them. So they move in, and things start going missing. Keys go missing, jewelry, forks. When you need them, you notice they're missing. And low-level stuff like this for a little while. One night they're sitting watching a movie downstairs, and as they're both sitting there together on the sofa, a plant to one side of the television shoots up into the air very fast, about 6 inches, and spins around and falls over. And this is their first real baptism of fire. No strings, no prank, no people as far as they can see. Presently, they're starting to get knocking and tapping going on. Plants are now being thrown, and thrown hard and fast around the house. Keith will come home from work. He's an IT consultant, by the way. You might think they picked the wrong guy to mess with here, but they were always one step ahead of Keith and his many devices. But he'd come home and he'd hear a pitter-patter of footsteps, like several people, beings, Christ knows what, running away. Presently, the noise takes on the decibel level of a sledgehammer, is how he describes it, hitting the beams of the house. It's peculiarly difficult to kind of place where the noise is happening or coming from, but it will go in 1, 2, 3s, and they start hunting around the house, and they eventually find up in the hallway, in a doorway off the upstairs landing, a dent, and it's big enough, as Keith says, you can roll your ankle in it if you're not careful. So Tina's downstairs listening. Keith, who by the way is 6'5.5", starts jumping up and down on the dent, and Tina's saying, yeah, that's about it, that's about what we're hearing, it's that kind of noise, you're not as loud as it. Now this kind of sense of the size, the power of what's ever doing this is interesting. We'll come back to this with a vengeance. So we've had things apported out of the house. We now get things apported into the house. Old letters, so that one day Keith opens up a drawer in the kitchen and everything almost spills out of it, because the stuff that he's had in there has been supplemented by old bills, letters that seem to belong to previous residents, toys, I think also jewellery that's not theirs turn up. And a big moment, one evening Tina's having a bath and Keith sees somebody around the corner of the doorway. He immediately thinks Tina. He jumps up expecting a bit of a joke and a game. He finds Tina's still in the bath. What is this? It's the first sighting of what he comes to call the Grey Lady. She is grey, eggshell box grey, and she's petite. She's got straggly hair. She seems to be having trouble. She seems to be confused, embarrassed. She's clicked on a light switch to try and get Keith's attention, he thinks, and she's trying to go through a door, and she finds that she can't. So he finds her in this kind of caught out position. The most important thing, I suppose, being that she's aware of him. There seems to be some awareness, and this returns later. So one night around this early stage in 2012, they're laughing in bed, kind of talking over the day's events and having an intimate conversation, and busy laughing away together, when suddenly the bedroom door slams violently. And looking back, this turns out to be one of the early signs of somebody listening and somebody saying, take this seriously. They'll come downstairs in the morning around this time and find all the cabinet doors open in the kitchen, items neatly on the floor, wine bottles out of Keith's wine rack, all over the place, but never broken, never. As Keith says poignantly, if you want to see a grown man cry, break one of my bottles of wine. But no one ever did, despite what they also managed to do. They see a plant gyrating in front of them in the sitting room. Sorry, Keith sees a plant gyrating in front of him in the kitchen, almost as though it's trying to get in his way, he says, and booming noises. I've talked about this before and have very useful input from Kieran Farrell on this. He has a lovely storytelling, that Keith, and he says, imagine taking a jar, mason jar, put it by the busiest highway in the world, record that noise in the jar, seal it up, open it up 50 years later. This is kind of what these noises sound like. They sound real, but they sound out of date. And to me, this gives us the kind of parallels. People in a booming noise in a farmhouse in Somerset, they try and imitate the noise with a gunshot, and they find they get an echo, and they notice there's no echo in the ghost noises. They're very flat. This also, of course, reminds us of Barry Colvin and his poltergeist recordings, rappings, noises with their own strange acoustic signature. You can't reproduce it normally. They hold a housewarming party quite early on. The women at the party are all complaining of having their hair pulled and being touched. People are constantly locked out by the sliding door. You might recall Rhonda back before they moved in. And yeah, this goes on. It doesn't ruin the party. At the end, there's just 4 of them. A woman called Kim, Kim's godmother, Kim's friend of Tina, and there's Tina and Keith. And they're sitting kind of chewing it over. Anatomy of the party, yeah, it was good, it's good. And a plant flies across the room in front of 2 of these witnesses. So the demon side of this, I prefer to keep the word demon out of it. and this perhaps has put off certain people. To be honest, though, we don't really know what we're talking about. It ought to have some kind of name. But as Keith himself was shrewd enough to point out, when he's had burning Bibles, when he's had 666 written on his wall, he wonders if this is actually your postmodern ghosts playing games to try and discredit your story. They've seen the Hollywood films, and this will make it all too lurid to be true. I make this point because I think the things that were interfered with a lot of the time, if it wasn't simply to get Keith's attention, it was things that were important to him. He lost a cup, aborted, could never find it, which his mother had given to him. The first books thrown were not Bibles, they were simply his IT books, but obviously this is his job, and these are thrown off a shelf in the upstairs hallway. These books are important to him. He's then advised to put a Bible there. He does this, and this is when the Bible stuff starts. The Bibles get thrown, and as you may know, Bibles disappear and turn up after varying minutes or months, either on fire or severely charred into almost ashes. Keith, getting desperate by this stage, does what's known as smudging with a sage stick around the house. And while he's doing this, something, and again we come back to the sense of power, something very powerful rushes past him. I believe he said to me privately that this was something way beyond human scale, that if it wanted to annihilate him, it could do it in a second. Anyway, this rushes past him visibly, and downstairs he sees the door yanked open. He sees the door slammed closed, as though, yeah, this thing has reacted to the smudging. It's fled out into the street, and then the door is jammed shut. So another little detail here that's interesting, 2013 is relatively quiet. So if you were trying to hoax a case, I don't know that you'd put in this very long, quiet interlude and then come back to all the chaos so much later. However, it's not completely quiet, and there's some very significant events. One of them is Keith wakes up in the night, finds himself on top of the sheets when he'd been under them. He finds that he's freezing cold and gasping for air, and he has a weird feeling that if he hadn't woken up much sooner, if he hadn't woken up at that time, he would not have woken up at all. And in terms of some of the tech evidence here, of which there's an impressive lot, Keith is a gamer and he tests, beta tests, Microsoft Kinect system before it goes on the market. This is September 2013, and he has technicians in the house at one point. He has technicians remotely monitoring him. The system has a device on the front of the television which basically records all the movements of the gamer. So if a bird were to be flying about behind the gamer, a cat jumping about, etc., this would get picked up. So anything human, animate is going to get picked up by the machine. Presently, he's playing away and gets told, stop, stop, stop. We've got a problem here. We've got a problem. Something's going on. And they can see from the Kinect system on the television, no one can see it in the room, lumps like lava lamp type lumps, but that size of a softball, varying in size, about 5 of them, and they're dangling below the ceiling. No one at Microsoft ever explains this at all. So 2014, it gets heavy again. 2nd of January, he's coming downstairs with a cocktail, and suddenly he takes a huge crash down the stairs. I think he's changed his mind about this over time, but initially he felt, was I pushed? Was I pushed? I can never really be sure. It all happened so fast. He was open-minded about this, but he's a big guy. He takes a hell of a beating down the stairs, and he comes out with a torn patella tendon, and he's laid up in the house for quite a long time. So one night, absolutely huge, thunderous crash in early 2014, and Keith describes the house as feeling dense. At one point he says it's as dense as a neutron star. He also gives the description of a very heavy invasion of personal space. If your personal space is kind of, I don't know, a meter away from you, a bit less, this is right up in your face. And I can talk about this later, but I've had a student describe that to me in very vivid detail, very hard-headed, rugby-playing barrister who had this experience of personal space, couldn't see or hit anything, but it spooked the hell out of him. He also has what he describes as like the house has been put in a microwave. It's highly active, it's highly agitated. The walls seem to be contracting. They're popping, snapping, pinging. This is as if it's the build-up. It's as if it's the vibration. It gets going, and then an object goes flying, as might remind some people of Matthew Manning. Again, we can talk about this in the discussion. They get constant power surges. They get problems with the electricity, telephone, internet. He spends a lot of money calling people out. They're completely baffled about this. March, April, things get very heavy. A big door is torn off its hinges upstairs. There's chaos. Everything that can be thrown around is thrown around. Everything that can be pulverized, and I mean pretty much to powder, is pulverized. Glass fittings, pottery, and so forth. And at this point, Keith, I should say, gets very little help from the Catholic Church for a long time. And he gets pretty little help, I'm afraid, from the SPR for a long time. But an organization called Noble Paranormal comes in fast, and Tina at this stage is in such a state of near collapse that she falls into the arms of Jennifer from Noble Paranormal and bursts into tears. Immediately that Jennifer arrives at the door, she says, "Jesus Christ, your house is humming. It's humming." Now, Keith and Tina can't hear a thing. So the woman says, "Step outside, step outside. Now walk back in again." "Yeah, I can hear it. It's a very, very low-pitched, low-volume humming, like a house is full of bees." So they've got used to this, but there is this energy again. There is this kind of weird, vibrating energy. Noble Paranormal does some monitoring, and they pull up a white mist floating about upstairs. It's only visible on their infrared. If we think again, this Microsoft business that tech picks up, but no one else sees it. So Bible fires. 31st of March, the alarm goes off. He finds a Bible on fire, and one of his crosses that he bought for protection is inside it. 4th of April, what's known in this story as the Katy Perry weekend. Now, if you think this has been scary so far, imagine Katy Perry playing constantly on your television and you cannot turn it off. Trigger warning here. So yeah, they've got TV and the music channel is going off. Katy Perry's song, "Are You Ready for a Perfect Storm?" It's a pretty clear message coming through here. So it plays pretty much just these 4 lines, "Are you ready for a perfect storm? Because once we get together," etc., etc. And it plays it over and over again. They turn it off. Doesn't matter. They unplug it. It doesn't matter. In the end, the only thing they can do is to leave it on and plugged in, but tuned to a different channel. This works. So having had their perfect storm warning, they get a hell of a weekend. One element in this is a relentless and very exactly targeted persecution of Keith, and that's well above any persecution of Tina. But part of this takes the form of sowing suspicion in Tina's mind about what Keith's doing. I wouldn't believe this if I hadn't heard it quite directly, but earrings are constantly found apported into the house. Keith will innocently pick one of these up. "Hey, Tina, is this your earring?" It's not Tina's earring, and you don't want to know what comes next. So this weekend they have mutual phone problems. She's trying to get hold of him like crazy. He's trying to get hold of her like crazy. She's fled the house because there's absolute bedlam going on. Keith comes back, wonders where she is, finds all the chaos. There's a tap running downstairs. A Bible goes missing for a few minutes, and it returns as a pile of ash, no flames. Very strange kind of conflagration. This goes on with chaos, everything thrown over that can be turned upside down, large items of furniture. By this time, a 300-pound wardrobe upstairs has been thrown along the hall several feet many times. Kitchen, you can find 60 cabinet doors open every morning or when you come home. And in terms of persecution, intention, watching, something very spooky now happens. Keith gets into the shower. He's been in the shower, I think, barely seconds. The alarm goes off, fire alarm. He rushes out and he sees an invisible force rush past him. He feels invisible force rush past him. He sees the street door fly open downstairs. He sees it slam shut. He gets downstairs and he cannot open it. Now, there's a fire in the house. Presently, he gets the fire brigade round, and it turns out to be a poster of his that's on fire. So at this point, they try and get a priest involved. Priest is damn all help. But Keith's now got email alerts set up in his house, and he will get very, very minute, precise alerts for sound, for motion, for problems. Basically, what seems to happen is he'll get a lot of alerts to bring him home. He'll get this attention thing going on. He'll get home and He'll find chaos. He'll find a camera that he set up has simply gone. Some of the time they're rebooted to factory settings. Some of the time they're pointed up to the wall and moved around. Once or twice they just completely disappear. I mean, the number of things that Keith's lost here, or money spent to avoid them being lost, including 2 safes, must add up, I would have thought, to thousands of dollars. I could check that with him. So summer 2015, Tina leaves. Tina and Keith split up, and it's difficult to find the biggest tragedy in this case, but perhaps this is it. Remote monitoring from a group called Live Paranormal brings up some useful data. Women called Nikki and Mary doing this from across in New York. And one of the things they get is a child's scream heard from the hallway camera, but not, and this is very, very close to it because the office gives onto the hallway, not from the office camera. This reminded me of Scott Rogo when he had noises coming from one side of a doorway, but completely inaudible on the other side of the doorway. So you've got a child scream, it's a girl, and then 2 days running, at pretty much exactly the same time, they get a mother and a girl, same child by the sound of it, arguing. Around this time, the garage door will go up in the morning before Keith touches the panel to leave the house. It opens again as if to welcome him as he drives up the drive, coming home. Now, perhaps the biggest intervention of all happens at the start of 2016. Steve Mira and Don Phillips come over all the way from, I think Manchester probably, but certainly from England, and spend, I think it's about a week, and they're up almost every hour that God sends. Incredibly rigorous, time-consuming, careful and experienced analysis and monitoring. And just a few of the things they get. EVPs, they have an EVP where a female voice says they stole our pillow. Don Phillips starts laughing because there's been shortage of pillows and he's moved a pillow in the night. Only he knows about this. They hear an angelic female voice which says, I hear springs, I hear springs. And these EVPs are all available, as with a lot of Keith's cases, a tremendous amount of data available for this. Keith comes up with a wonderful point to Don Phillips, who's a pretty seasoned researcher, sorry, Don Phillips and Steve Mira. And he says, well, look, these EVPs, how do we know they're brand new? How do we know people haven't heard them before? I don't know if this will ever get done, but it should have Keith's name on it if it does. Keith knows about the Shazam database, whereby you can whack up your phone at a speaker and have it identify the song. I've seen this done myself. This is witchcraft, surely. Keith says, well, look, shouldn't we have a database like this for EVPs? You whack up your EVP. Oh, yeah, this person heard it here. Let's hope this gets done sometime. On the landing, they hear footsteps running away, and these seem to be running away from infrared tripwires, which they've set up and have just been set off by whatever, the spirits, let's call them. So they have an EVP where the spirits, again, seem very curious about the technology, and there's a dialogue. It's a camera, night cam. This dialogue is going. What else? They're debating about whether to leave the door open or shut as they set up cameras. And on the real-time dialogue, you can hear Keith and Steve, I think it is, shall we leave this door open or shut? Shut. When you play about the EVP, shall we leave this door open or shut? Shut. In the background, they will just go through it. Take note, they will just go through it. This corresponds to another EVP where you can hear one of the spirits saying, leave him alone. So a sense of, yeah, there's multiple things here and they do not agree with each other. Okay, that's a very compressed version of a very hellish few years. And Keith finally moved out. Moving out did not solve the problem. So just to be clear here, we do seem to have a very haunted house. Keith had no problems of this sort all his life until age 42. Neither did Tina. They had no interest in it. They never encouraged it. They move into a very haunted house. By the time Keith leaves, he is a very haunted person. And by this, what do I mean? Well, he's had these problems in hotels all across America. He's had his sheets pulled off. He's had electrical problems, which have been noted by the management of the hotels. He's been poked and prodded on a plane at 35,000 feet. He's been shoulder checked, i.e. spun round hard on his swivel chair at work. Bear in mind, he's a guy of 6'5", weighs 250 pounds. So he's moved to a new flat, and within hours of the new flat, he's got water puddles, comes downstairs to these plumbers or maintenance people coming completely baffled. This is May 2016, almost exactly 4 years after the events in Bothell. His attorney from 2014 onward rings him up one night and is going nuts. Her lights are going crazy in her house. Now, this happens to her in a total of 3 different properties. She ends up being Keith's ex-attorney. This might sound funny, but this starts to get poignant. Keith is now split up with Tina, but he goes out on dates with various women. And let me give you here this from the horse's mouth. This is just one of a few. This is an email. 2 weeks ago, I was on a date at a live jazz show, the Edgewater Hotel, downtown Seattle. The girl I was with and I were talking, deep in conversation while listening to music, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from under the table. I immediately noticed the glass of water I was drinking from is missing. The girl and I looked under the table, and sure enough, there was the shattered glass of water. And they debate this. They've both got their arms around each other. They're in the corner. There's no traffic going by them. The waitress is bewildered. That kind of glass is a thick water glass. It doesn't smash if you drop it on the floor. It's not a wine glass. There is an email exchange between the couple confirming this. Another case where he's going out with a girl and she says something rather stinging about Tina. Her glass explodes in her face, as far as I understand, not to any damage to her, but nonetheless, sense of seriously active persecution and a sense of really spooky eavesdropping going on here. This is a period when there's been a terrible murder in Seattle, and somebody who's going out on a date with somebody they've met on the internet will Google the person they're out with, the man, the moment they find out their name. This is happening to Keith, and he has a hell of a lot of good, promising first dates that never go anywhere because the women find out that he's from the Bothell Hell House, or they go back home and they have quite a lot of things happening in their homes, including their dog, for example, barking at something in the corner, their lights going crazy. They go home with Keith sometimes. They'll be sitting with him and they'll see some shadow figure looming over the back of the sofa, darting across the room. So what else is happening? This degree of stuff continues while he's in 2 different apartments, and he gets an alternation of what you might see as, I suppose, hell and heaven, down to the present time pretty much. And it's this: he gets extremely horrible lucid nightmares. Start off in his first new apartment. They include very old, very bad family things that he would have been hard pressed to remember day to day, that have come at him like a sledgehammer in the middle of the night. And alternating with this, he gets something that, is really off of my boggle threshold, I suppose, despite having hit a big learning curve of paranormal discovery with Keith's case. And that was after about 3 years intensive study of the subject. He starts to get what really sounds like a multiple succubus experience at night. He's got intensely seductive women all over him. They're murmuring Keith in his ear in a highly seductive voice. I can't quite do justice to this, but if you read Keith's account, it has his inimitable storytelling ability. He's kissed on the lips, he's stroked, he's teased, he seems to be, this is a slightly liminal dream waking condition, but he seems to be naked while this is happening, and it's all pretty full on sexual. It's like the prelude to an actual copulation. His ear is nibbled, and there seem to be various spirits involved in this. It will go on for an awfully long time, and then suddenly, this is his conclusion of one of these episodes early on, quote, "The spirit began breathing air out of me. Bells and whistles start going. Abort. My spiritual antibodies kicked into high gear and shut down everything. I heard the mattress squeak, the sound it makes when someone gets on or off the bed while my eyes were opening. Something was on the bed with me. Did I drink a gallon of dark black coffee or something? So jittery, it was not even funny." So this actually persists many, many times, and it changes as it goes. So what he describes as the spirit extraction, something sucking the breath out of him, lasts longer each time. And at the conclusion of the whole thing, he's not jittery, but extremely fatigued, heavily fatigued. Now, this bears comparing with one of the most memorable episodes of his Bothell phase. He was trying to catch up on his sleep one afternoon. He was lying, trying to get a siesta on his bed, alone in the house, and he was kind of half in, half out sleep, just dozing off. And he feels something hit the bed. It hits the bed rather like a cat, that kind of weight, and it moves towards him rather like a cat, that stealth mode, as he calls it. And he's really just bugged now. He just wants to go to sleep. He's had it with being persecuted all the time. And in his head, he's just get it over with, just get it over with. And at this point, something rushes through him, something zooms through him. He describes it as extreme euphoria. He's never felt anything like it before. He's tingling throughout his body. And when I read this, I was editing the book the first time I read this, I had this eureka moment, because I'd read this in a book of American ghost accounts where a guy in a restaurant in Washington, the other Washington, as in DC, had a ghost, fairly low level, non-problematic, in his restaurant, and one day it walked through him. He said it was the most euphoric feeling he'd ever felt, tingling down to the ends of his fingers and toes. So he's got something that seems a bit like a cat landing on his bed. He's got what he describes as minions, little kind of 1 foot high, very black, odd reptilian things walking past his door, seemingly checking him out. And he's got these lava lamp, softball-sized things hanging off his ceiling on the Kinect. Where does this leave us? Well, one of the other phenomena that was occurring at this stage after Bothell was heartbeats, as well as being poked and prodded pretty relentlessly, I think sometimes pretty much all night, in bed. He's getting heartbeats, and he's getting them at the top of the bed, as if they're under the pillow, and he's getting them at his feet. So Keith, in his very relentless, engaged, high-tech mode, which has never really left him, and has made this case such an incredible kind of treasure trove of data, Keith buys some very heavy-duty digital stethoscopes, things where you can record, you can send all the recordings any way you like, you know, .com, Bluetooth stuff, and he gives these recordings to medical friends of his, and the people say, right, if this was a human heartbeat, I wouldn't give you many more hours to live. The point is the heartbeats are very, very fast, and they seem to correspond to the heartbeat roughly of a cat. So again, size, weight, stealth mode. If anyone's got any ideas on this, I'll be very grateful. Okay, so this is a very compressed narrative of what's actually happened. I'm sure it will keep happening. It's probably happening pretty much now over in Seattle. But just to recap and draw together some of the elements, which I've termed, for want of a better phrase, weird physics. Weird physics. So we've got this noise that sounds like it's come out of a jar, it's out of date. We've got something that is strong enough to give him that feeling of, I could annihilate you, when it hurls past him, completely invisible, and to throw across the room a 300-pound wardrobe. And we've got this humming, this popping. We've got not only apports, but a cross that's lost by Keith. And it turns up inside the washing machine when it's running a cycle. He's in the kitchen, he can suddenly hear this clank, clank, clank. What the hell's this? Presently, he stops the cycle, he opens up the washing machine. The cross is inside the washing machine while it's going. One day, he's walking down the stairs, just ready to go to work. He's got a shirt on. Suddenly blinks, all his shirt buttons have completely disappeared. His shirt is wide open. His shirts he takes to the dry cleaners locally, and he gets there one day to pick them up. The guy is very embarrassed. He doesn't really know what to say. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. His shirt is shredded, wrecked, ruined. Poor old Keith, don't worry, this happens. So, apports. In terms of Keith's tech and how it's been useful, Keith has got very sophisticated alarm systems a few months into this, and one of them runs off the telephone system, so it doesn't matter if your power goes out, it will still run. He gets sound alerts, he gets motion alerts very minutely, kind of by the second on email. And at a certain time, he's coming home to find chairs. I think there's about 4 or 5 of them around the dining room table in the kitchen. He's finding them grouped in a little huddle, like 3 spirits are having a meeting. Anyway, he gets a motion alert, I think it is, he gets an alert one day, The alarm system hasn't gone off, but he goes home. When he gets in and goes upstairs, he finds a chair from downstairs is standing very neatly on his office desk. Now, this alarm system has a beam across the stairs, so where Steve Mirror and co have got their tripwires that will set off because they're invisible, anything that carried this chair up the stairs would set off the alarm beam. So we seem to have a chair apported cleanly straight up from the bottom to the top of the house. What else have we got? Sounds. He's hearing sounds of an attic ladder being opened. Very precise kind of creaking concertina sound of one of those unfolding ladders being opened. The house has no attic, never mind an attic ladder. He knows this sound because it comes from back home in Texas when he was a kid. Also, similarly, a chest being dragged with latches clicking against it. Very precise, dragging the latches, clicking. Again, this is not in the house, but it's a sound he remembers because they had this trunk when he was a kid in Texas. Now, here's a good one. If anyone can explain this or has seen anything like it, I owe them a drink when we can all finally meet up again. They have a party and it goes okay, it's fine. The next day, Keith's cleaning up beer bottles. He's a bit hungover. He's trying to just watch a film and take it easy. Anyway, he's downstairs and he hears a crash upstairs. He goes up and he sees a new dent on the wall. I think this is his office, which is the site of most of the problems. And he cannot see anything. Nothing's made it. Nothing is near it. Nothing has moved. So Tina's heard it as well. Tina can't see anything. 30 minutes later, he finds a bottle in the middle of the floor, 30 minutes after the noise. And there is white powder on the neck of the bottle. The white powder is from the wall. The bottleneck fits the dent in the wall like a glove. This was my favorite of crazy physics, I suppose, but there's more. His car is messed around with endlessly. He has Die KL written on his wall. He has it written in the snow. He has it written in a kind of syrupy substance in his car. A neighbor knocks very early one morning. Hey, Keith, do you know this? He looks out. All his car doors are open. He constantly early on gets the trunk light, trunk is open light come on. Now, one of his fobs, along with many other things, is highly sophisticated electronic key fob for the car has been stolen, apported. He loses driving license, lots of money, wallets. Buying two safes makes no difference. A lot of money and inconvenience goes into this. In the end, he replaces the sets of fobs, both of them, the spare and the standard one, with a new system. Now, when he does this, this is my memory, I'd have to double check this, but I believe that when this happens, the problems with the car stop, as though something was using the stolen fob to do this. I.e., it couldn't just do it. It was using this to actually activate it, and that stopped the problem. In terms of apports, pretty good one was a frozen chicken taken out to defrost in the kitchen for their supper. Tina's suddenly saying, "Where the hell is the chicken? Where the hell's the chicken?" Keith hunts around the kitchen and he finds it under a toaster. Now, as he emphasizes, try taking a frozen chicken and putting it under a toaster. You just cannot do it. That is how it is. The toaster would slide off, but no, there it is, neatly underneath the toaster with the thing balanced on top of it. So the Bible's burned in that very peculiar way, which probably most people have heard of, that the dress sets fire on a person, they're not harmed. A box of matches scorches on the outside, the matches don't set fire. The outside of a book is damaged, not the inside. Very peculiar kind of scorch marks. In terms of persecution of Keith, to bring up this weird physics and something like a poltergeist fire, he at one point has suddenly all over his room little photographs of himself from way, way back, years back. They've been in boxes for years. He's forgotten they even exist. And every single photograph with his face in it, it might have somebody else in it, but where Keith's face is, it's scorched out, it's obliterated. And yet there's no scorch marks, there's no fire marks. Simply the corners of the photographs are curled up. So what else have we got? Something that is quite recent, and I don't know quite what to make of it, but I think it's a clue for this. He won an Alexa unit at work. He didn't want it particularly, but he got it for a prize. He took it home, and when he got it home, he had intense pain. This is a stoical guy who really toughed out a torn patella tendon, and he said, Within seconds of assembling and getting the unit to work, I was attacked. Intense stomach pain, pain all over. I remember I took my blood pressure and it was extremely high. Emergency room, the hospital, no one could determine the root cause. It felt like a set of knives was being stuck in me from all sides. My blood pressure went through the roof, 160 over 110, something like that. He got rid of the Alexa, it was absolutely fine. It went away straight off. So in terms of poltergeist energy, we seem to have another little weird clue, another little piece of the jigsaw, if we can work out how or where to put it. So rounding this up, what is this? The most obvious answer to that is something there was there already, but it really got its hooks into Keith. There was a really relentless, eavesdropping, intelligent, continuous persecution of Keith that has not stopped until now. It was perhaps substantially responsible for wrecking his relationship. It certainly made a great deal of effort to do that, including along with the earring stuff. The phones were messed up, making Tina think he was out with a girl. He had his phone switched off. But there was also a tweet that was sent from Keith to somebody else saying, "I love you," which Tina saw. The fires that happened, he has fires to his desk monitors as well as in the office on the poster. One of them happens when he's in the shower. He's been in there barely seconds. Another one happens when he's asleep. Yeah, he's losing his keys, wallet, driving license, etc., etc. And in terms of what this might be, we've got the Grey Lady who interacts with Keith. She plays peekaboo with Keith. She turns up, I think, 3 times. There's a pretty convincing photo captured by one of the paranormal teams of her. He's also got the White Lady. They seem to be the same, but the White Lady moves by as though she's an old film. She's got something in her arms. It makes a noise like 4 leaves rustling. She's completely unaware of Keith. So we've got an interactive spirit. We've got a non-interactive spirit. If you want something extra to throw into the mix in case your head isn't screwed enough already, Keith, after he gets in touch with Rhonda while she's still alive, the previous tenant, he's got FaceTime going with her and Skype conversations. He comes to realize that all of these versions, the Grey Lady, the White Lady, look eerily like Rhonda. Make of that what you will, I don't really know. Yeah, multiple spirits. They will just go through. They will just go through. They stole our pillow. And another one, particularly telling, leave him alone. Leave him alone. He gets recordings while Live Paranormal are monitoring, and you have us coming back to this child's cough, which started the whole thing off. They ask at one point, how many spirits? And the reply is 3, but it sounds like tree. So it sounds like a child lisping. Another feature of the EVPs is that they seem to have an Irish accent. There's a lot of female EVPs. Keith has this very seductive female voice in his ear. And yeah, he speculates that these spirits are Irish. They tend to elide the TH at the end of his name. And he has done research on Irish settlers in the area as well as Native American settlers in previous times. So I'm just really throwing this out here, I suppose, in a very compressed form. I think this is a wonderful example of somebody battling constantly to get technological backup, because they're constantly being told. He's being told by his brother, he's being told by his own family, look, hey, I think I believe you, but get me a photo, get me a video. And I think this case in some ways has done amazing things, thanks to Steve and Don, thanks to Carissa Fleck, to Nikki and the Live Paranormal team, as well as Jennifer at Noble Paranormal. It's done pretty impressive things with technology, and this is useful for some people's approach to this problem. But I was just going back through Keith's first book and looking at his second book, and at one point, if I can try and call this up, because I'd like to give it through the horse's mouth, you have to bear with me a little bit because of the file problems I've been having. But yeah, I think I can run a find for this. And really, this just made me think what I've thought many times, is that what I've learned researching poltergeists is I had a hell of a learning curve with this, where I'd never come across this. So I had no interest in this. I had no desire to research it. And when I started asking my friends about it, I had friends of 7 and 12 years duration saying to me, yeah, that's happened to me. This was in one case the most traumatic thing that had ever happened to a friend. They had never breathed a whisper of it to me. And it was just my experience to have this happen over and over and over again. A few months back, I was in Barcelona airport leaving to come back to Cardiff. And I was sitting in the cafe, got talking to a girl who was also coming back on the same flight. And I was saying, what have you been doing? We had a chat about this, where she's been, where I've been. What do you do? Oh, I'm a student. What do you do? Well, I write books, and I write this and I write that. But let me tell you, the most interesting thing I've ever written about is this. I'll give her sort of 5 minutes on Ghosts and Poltergeist. Very polite young lady. I think she thinks you're completely cracker. She's been very polite about it. And she peeks up and says, okay, well, that's interesting, because when I was a little girl, really just 1 year old, I think, an old lady used to come and read to me in bed. And when I was 18, no, 17 years later, I said to my uncle, oh, this old lady used to come and read to me in bed. My uncle showed me a photograph and said, hey, is this her? And the girl says, yep, that was her. Her uncle says, right, that's your grandmother who died before you were born. I got the story from one meeting in about 8 minutes. The moral of the story is, listen to what people tell you. And I'll cut to Keith now. And this is, I think, a nice credo for people who are obsessed with measurement, people who are obsessed with positivistic evidence criteria. They have their value, but in the end, we need to look people in the eye when we can, or we just need to listen to what they say. So the researchers entering the home are not the subject matter experts. If there's to be a subject matter expert here, it has to be the house occupant. I live here. Tina lived here. We're the only two people that know the entirety of what happened. We're the only two people that know exactly when stuff happened. Forget all the handheld devices. Forget the items you checked in through customs. Forget your EMF machine. Forget those devices even exist. Ultimately, the best tool you have for figuring stuff out is right in front of you. It's the people that live there. It's Tina and me. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.
Well, may I say, first of all, thank you very much indeed, Richard, for a most stimulating and absorbing talk on this case.
Thanks.
Please.
No, just saying thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that it will also have generated a lot of thought, certainly has the potential to generate a lot of discussion. And would you be willing to take some questions?
Absolutely. If I can just, I was a bit, the IT glitches through, so it's just very practical, but if I can just go and grab myself something to drink so that I don't start coughing in the midst of this. So if you're okay to line up questions for just 2 minutes.
I'm sure you more than deserved, Richard. Yes, please do refresh yourself.
Simplify things, I think, is I can kick off the video in a moment. This was just a practical thing because of my eyesight and reading my script. But now that we're just talking, you know, I might have to cut to the text to answer a question, but I can get the video going. If you can forgive my not having had a haircut in 6 months, but yeah,
that's all right.
No. I'll be right back with you. I'm just going to grab something. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, if I may just touch back to Rob quickly, you were suggesting that the chat box facility could be applied for questions.
Yeah, it's only because there are still so nearly 60 of us online, for everyone to unmute themselves and then fire questions in, I think we'll get a little bit ungainly. So perhaps if people send chat to everyone so they can read them, they send the questions on the chat, which if people aren't sure is right at the middle of the bottom of your screen. If you just click chat, it opens up a little dialog box and you can type away. Depending on you know, how many questions there are and how long Richard takes to answer them, we may not get through them all, obviously. But so I'll, you know, Alan, if things are going on a bit long or whatever, if you could maybe interject. But I'll try and filter and monitor if that's okay. I think that if that's okay with everyone, I think that might be the most efficient way to do it.
I think that is the practical solution, because certainly from a chairing point of view, at any one time I can really only easily see about 20 people at once.
Hi, Richard. We can see you.
Hi,
Yeah.
great, thanks.
Good. Hello.
Hi.
Right. I'm just thinking, Rob, how would you, do you want to run through the questions as you've got
Yeah,
them?
Richard, if it's okay with you, as the questions come up, I might just read them out. Apologies if people, as I've got about 5 or 6 already, so if, we're not in a rush, but if people could just hold on for a second, that would be great. This one from John. Keith thinks poltergeists are external demons. He's put in brackets, I think. Does Richard agree, and how does this fit in with his previous conclusions?
Yeah, I think the word demons is tricky because it can put off certain people. And I think if I hadn't known Keith so well over such a lot of conversations and hadn't read so many cases, that put me off a little bit. But yeah, I think I would say it's something malevolent, it's something nasty. Did it push him downstairs? I suppose that's the most harm it could have done. I don't believe in demons. I don't think in the traditional Christian sense. But then again, I'm haunted by the fact that having written a book on fairies and a book on vampires, people very much were experiencing what we'd call poltergeist activity from these vampires, these fairies. They knew what to do about it to some extent because they believed in fairies, because they gave it a name, because they gave it a label. This hasn't worked entirely for Keith, I have to say. Catholic Church has been a very mixed use. But yeah, I don't know, I suppose something's a bit less terrifying if you give it a name. But no, I don't want to take a Christian perspective on this. I think something interesting is going on. I think it's an independent consciousness. I think it'd be interesting to know why it's got these problems, why it wants to do this for its rather sad eternity, and why not everyone does. You know, if anyone's got any ideas, I'd be interested to know.
I think you answered this next question, but it's, Gia is asking, is the activity still going on or has it ended? If it's ended, how long was the entire duration?
It's still going on, I'm afraid. I mean, one of the things I perhaps should have said, and I'm very much keen to get out of this, is if anyone knows anybody remotely on the scene, whatever it might be, remotely would be better at the moment, who can help Keith out, then that would be great, because this has really wrecked his life for now 8 more years.
Ruth asks that she reminds us there was a year when things were quieter, and asks, has there anything been identified in terms of what might have made it quieter at that time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we were running checks, Keith and I, on good old spaceweather.com at one point, as everyone knows this, on the basis of William Roll and where he analysed solar storms as triggers possibly for poltergeist events in the Tina Resch case. So we were checking kind of wind speed, you know, solar storms, sun flares, and so on. I don't think we really made that stick. Keith's other conclusion, and he suspects this might be why you get some more problem in the house for some people, less problem in the house for other people, is emotional turmoil. You know, he was going through varying degrees of emotional crisis and not talking to each other with Tina at different points. But yeah, I don't entirely know. I think, as I say, it's interesting. It doesn't look like a very good Hollywood film if you suddenly whack in this long, quiet, calm period. Why it quieted down. But he was very convinced all the way through, and he's got a lot of experience, that, yeah, the more tense they got, the more angry they got with each other, the more dissension there was going on in the house, the more was able to happen. I mean, it really was like plugging in a bad energy socket, if you like, roused between Keith and Tina.
Another Robert asks, how many witnesses are there apart from Keith and his girlfriend?
Yeah, if I can just actually cut to a file here, because I wouldn't trust myself to remember, I made a note of roughly this. Now, this is an estimate, but it gives us a pretty good idea. Let's get to it. So, I mean, there's Steve Mira, there's Don Phillips, there's the paranormal teams, remotely, you've got live paranormal and you've got noble paranormal. You've got witnesses, I'm afraid you wouldn't really want to call witnesses, but ghost adventures is a whole other episode. They're here, who came in and couldn't find what they wanted, so kind of made up a story really to suit themselves. A television woman came in to interview them, a woman called Elisa Jaffa, and she heard a crashing noise from upstairs and hurtled off, I believe, down the street. Who else have we got? Party guests, pretty much all of them, I think more particularly the women had their hair pulled and so forth, but a lot of party guests. The two at the end very directly witnessed to the plant problem. He would have interactions with innumerable hotel staff about his perhaps Wi-Fi, electrical problems. Work colleagues have been aware of it. He's saying work colleagues don't want to get in the elevator with him to some extent. He's a very successful IT consultant. What else? Yeah, The Night of Ghost Adventures. It was pretty heartrending actually to read this. You can see it in the first book. They are excited to see themselves on TV. They decide to go down to a hotel downtown, have drinks, have supper, watch it down there, and then stay the night in the hotel so that they can all drink. And what happens is this: the Ghost Adventures is appalling travesty of what actually happened. They're completely shell-shocked. They start quickly getting an appalling lot of abuse and trolling online. Keith is telling Tina not to look at it, but she can't stop looking at it. He says a lot of it's pretty quasi-racist, and I think he's probably right. And they go to bed in a pretty dispirited state. In the morning, Keith's mate is in a different room, or I think might be sleeping on Keith's sofa in his hotel room. Anyway, says, look, I'm sorry, I made a real mess of your towel. He's been scratched all over his face, all over the front of his bridge of his nose, and so forth. So witnesses there. Another party, I think separate from the housewarming party, Tina's notebook appears from nowhere in the middle of a karaoke song. A bit of sympathy for a ghost that wants to break up karaoke, but a lot of witnesses to that. The Microsoft people, I don't know how many, I could probably get off Keith, but all his recent dates pretty much. A hell of a lot of women have experienced this, sometimes in pretty dramatic ways. So yeah, I don't know if anyone witnessed anything on planes when he's being buffeted around, but that gives us an idea anyway.
Okay, thank you. Andy Wilson asks, how does the poltergeist understand English? For example, playing the song words, "Are you ready for the perfect storm?" Is it Keith's subconscious or an external entity?
He's a fan of Katy Perry to a minor degree, I think he told me. Is it Keith's subconscious? Sorry, what does that question mean? Does it mean are the words in his head, or are they manipulated?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Andy, if you could maybe unmute yourself if you're still on and maybe clarify that question.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Obviously, if it knows that line is significant, how does it understand English words for Keith to understand? It makes them, scared, or it would have to have some knowledge of English to play that line over and over again, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as far as I know, the spirits were English speakers. They spoke English, sometimes with an Irish accent. You can hear the EVPs, and it's in English, basically. Yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah. So just to clarify, you believe it's actually external spirits who are English speaking while they're alive, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Well, in such an area, I'd be very hesitant to absolutely believe anything. But what I can tell you is that the EVPs are in English, and you can only hear them in fairly typical EVP fashion on the recording. The people in the room don't hear them when they're having a conversation or when the thing is actually going on. So yeah, they speak English. I don't think there's any case of any other languages that I know. I can check that with Keith, but I never remember hearing any other language. There's a growling noise as well as this at times, but I think always English.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Linda Parry asks, could the entities be living in a parallel time dimension?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because Keith, who's been a very shrewd kind of fast learning observer of all this chaos, has been saying where the hell are all my keys, mugs, forks, you name it, you know, his wallet, his money, his driving licenses, where are they all this time? You know, the Bibles, they come back. But one of the Bibles took over a year to come back. Some of the things never came back. So in terms of another dimension, there's that, isn't there? In terms of the weirdest bit of physics that I tried to get across, I think was this utterly cracked thing with the cause effect deal. You hear this noise, you see the dent in the wall, and you find the bottle only 30 minutes later. And I think that was accurate. I don't think he just happened to find it 30 minutes later. I think they heard the bump of the bottle falling 30 minutes later. But certainly he was sometime in the room. You know, there's no bottle, there's a dent on the wall. So yeah, I mean, it's the most head-bending stuff, I suppose, isn't it? Because you're thinking, the thing I think that bothers some people about eternity, and I knew of a girl who was absolutely terrified of the idea of eternity, not because of hell, but because heaven would be just as bad, because you couldn't get out of it. It was going on forever. So you'd have to assume that your sense of time is completely different. You have to assume that something radical has happened to your sense of time. And with these spirits, I mean, the gap, in a way, you wonder about that gap. Was there a gap for the spirits? There's a gap for Keith when things are much less heavy. Was there that gap for them? Yeah, I'd be willing to entertain that belief. I mean, certainly the fact that they can interact, they are hearing him, you know. And then the other question is, why do they come across dimensions, to put it that way, with one set of occupants but not with another? I don't know.
Thank you. Neil asks, have you any more information on the ingredients of the paint used to deface the doors?
Yeah, there's a lot. I didn't have time to go into this because I was trying to compress 2 books worth for us today. But Keith has done a lot of impressive forensics on this. And it's what he describes as bone black. It's a pigment that you get from burning bones, basically. And I think it's quite an ancient one. I think he believes it was used, or has found that it was used by Native American Indians. And yeah, he's had some pretty detailed dialogues with paint shop people, and they've been pretty baffled in the way that, you know, fire teams can be baffled by the fires and so forth. Also, it's worth noting, perhaps just in this connection, that he's had this weird syrupy stuff, right, dye KL on his car, but he's also had at one point candles thrown at him. And he had stuff written on the wall, I believe, with candle wax. This is from memory way back now. But yeah, there's the bone black writing, there's the syrup stuff. And yeah, if you want, I can get more analysis off Keith, or I'm sure actually he'd be very happy to talk about this, whether in an actual talk or, you know, on email, because he's put a lot of work into that and he's fascinated with what it was, what it might mean.
Colin Day asks, have you ever witnessed any phenomena whilst in Keith's company?
No, I haven't, but I've never actually been physically in Keith's company because he's in Seattle, I'm in Wales, and I've been to America. But he claimed a lot of problems with his manuscript, which I was editing. It was very difficult at times to get through it because the degree of errors was such that you really had to read a whole page to understand what was trying to be said. Now, I don't mean any disrespect to Keith here, because his belief is that something was done to the manuscript as he was trying to write it. I mean, certainly it's very clear that when he started discussing this case, he would get heightened activity. When he tried to ring the fire brigade, when the door was slammed on him and wouldn't open, just after he got out of the shower, the phone went crazy for 3 attempts. He had to make 4 attempts to get his address across to the woman on 911. So in terms of somebody messing around with his manuscript, I don't know. I'm not just making this up. I mean, I did leave it pretty much word perfect, and there are now quite a few mistakes in it, which I didn't leave there. So that might be the closest I've got, which is fairly light treatment, really, to having any witnessing of events.
Thank you. JSB asks, has anyone reported activity in the house since Keith has moved out?
Yeah, I was very keen to find this out. I thought people would ask, but Keith has said he's deliberately left them alone. I'm not sure if he's left them alone because he doesn't want to spook them. I don't think things could get any worse for him particularly, but he said he's made a decision not to contact them. He's obviously got a lot of information from Rhonda before she died. He knew that I think there were 5 residents in 10 years. Just to add also, the landlord was very, very low key about a lot of damage to his property. I mean, he was very easygoing about it. When Steve Mira and Don were there, Keith said to them very, emphatically, look, I'm going to cook you king salmon your last night before you go. This is a local speciality. Shortly after this, the cooker more or less exploded. Sparks shot out of the socket. He had to pull the socket from the wall. Landlord had to produce a new cooker, and he was pretty easygoing about that, as with a lot of other things, as though he knew what had happened before. But I'm afraid no. In terms of new tenants, I do not know. Keith does not know.
Tony Hayes asks, has there been any sequence to the phenomena? So puts, for example, what's occurred first before ramping up to what? Has there been any periods of no activity, such as nothing for 3 days and then repeating and so on?
Yeah, good question, thanks. Yeah, it definitely has ramped up. So you start with a kid's cough, you go on to things getting pinched and not coming back. You go on to the plant lifting up and gyrating around. You have plants then shooting across the place. You then have hammering noises that sound like a sledgehammer hitting the internal beams of a house. You then have all your doors will be open in the kitchen when you come down, all your car doors will be open. In terms of actual precise moments when it's ramped up, I suppose, there's that moment where Keith felt that everything was very dense, that there was something in the house, there was something invading his personal space. It was really like you could almost, hear the walls popping, pinging, and so forth. I know Matthew Manning described pinging going on in his haunted house way back in the 60s. So yeah, he said that's usually a prelude to something shooting off. The other one I didn't mention was they had a ceiling fan. Now it operated normally, you pulled the cord and it just whirred around in the bedroom, but quite a lot of the time it would squeak maddeningly. And so much so that you're trying to get to sleep with it on, you have to get up and either turn it off or fix it. Now Keith thought he'd fixed it, but over time, every time the ceiling fan started squeaking, it was pretty much like that, vibration of an object on the spot before it shoots across the room. Probably all heard of that. So it was like something, building up, quivering, and then whoosh, bang. And the ceiling fan was that kind of build-up, warning thing going on. But in terms of quietness, yeah, 2013, a lot of 2013 after the kind of 7 months of 2012 was really pretty quiet. And 2014 was very, very heavy.
Ben Pavlon asks, has Keith ever conducted an experiment seeing if the object he has collects the energy? Okay. I'm not.
In what sense? How would the energy be measured or no?
If Ben's still online, Ben, can you clarify? I'm not sure Ben's online. Okay, I'll move on for the moment. Mike Pope asks, do you think all of the activity relates to one entity portraying itself as multiple entities?
That's a tricky one, but it's a kind of spooky thought if that is the case, because the power of such an entity would mean that it was persecuting Tina while she was in the house. It was persecuting Keith while he was maybe several states away on business or he was at work. It was persecuting his attorney while Keith was in a different house to her. And yeah, the conversations are a tricky one, I suppose. I mean, hey, if you're talking about something that's largely unknown to us, I suppose it could do it, but they're having dialogues, they're having conversations, and they're having conversations, as I said, in which they disagree. Leave him alone. They will just go through it. You're not talking about one unified agenda here. So it's an interesting thought, but I suppose the Occam's razor point of view goes against it, that there seem to be multiple things. In a sense, I found my head getting around these multiple things hard going, but there's so much evidence for it that really seems to be the case. I suppose then there's a physical side as well, when physical force is being used to knock Keith about on the plane, physical force is being used to throw things around in the house, and also physical presence seems to be evident. you know, when he's coming out of the shower, this thing hurtling past him, opening the door, slamming the door, the things that pitter-patter away, the multiple things hanging off the ceiling, and so on. So I'd have to go, you know, I wouldn't want to be absolute, but I'd go for multiple spirits, I would say.
During that, Lisa Bow, you wanted to say something? Lisa, you raised your hand. I don't know if that was in error, or if you wanted to say something, if you unmute yourself, otherwise, okay, short one here. Did any, I don't know if this is Margot or Marge O. McDonald, apologies. Did anyone get persecuted who didn't already know about the activity?
I think I'm almost certain they must have done. The question would be whether Keith's attorney knew about it. But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about some of his dates, I'm sure in the early stages with these dates, they did not know. And Keith didn't really want them to know. And you can see his point by this stage. So the girl that has the glass explode under the table, the girl that has the glass explode in her face, and who else have we got who didn't know? I don't know if his attorney knew or not. I'll have to find out from Keith if she did. That's a really interesting question. Who else persecuted? Yeah, his friends knew, so we can't count that at the hotel. No, I think most people probably were aware of something, whether they believed it or not. Elisa Jaffa knew about it. I suppose she wasn't really persecuted, she was frightened. I would say the dates are the best one for that. You know, most of the dates initially didn't know, and they were being targeted, if you like. It's probably persecuting Keith more than anything. But
Delianne asks, she wonders if the house is sited on an old sacred Indian burial ground, given the reaction to the sage smudging. Yeah, I believe it is. Keith has gone into this. There was a cabin on it way back. It's quite a new house, of course, but there was a cabin that he's got records and photographs of. And yes, I think it was whether it was a burial ground, but he identified, I think, quite a lot of smallpox deaths way back. So it had been a site of heavy mortality. So yes, there is Native American residents in there. If it's precisely on a burial ground, I'd have to check, but it's a good possibility. And one of the symbols where he got die KL on the wall, there's an upside down man symbol. He identified this as a Native American symbol, meaning a man has died or a man is about to die. I think a lot of the other questions, unless I've missed them, apologies, seem to ask. Lisa asks, did Ghost Adventures ever answer for their program, ever explain or apologise? Quite the reverse. Unfortunately, I got an email from Keith a few weeks ago saying Ghost Adventures was doing a follow-up, or had done a follow-up. I can't remember if he got any notification, but there was certainly no contact with him to say this is what we're doing. He had no idea what angle they were going to take when they put the first program out. It devastated everybody. The abuse was really nasty. No, as far as I can work out, what happened with Ghost Adventures was they spent a relatively small amount of time there. A lot of it was just setting up equipment, and they decided they needed an angle. They spent some money, they wanted a story, they wanted a program. So the angle, and I'm giving this in paraphrase, but Keith felt that a lot of very clever editing was done to give the impression that it was a hoax and that he and Tina faked it. Yeah, and no, they've manipulated, exploited this for a second program with no contact with Keith, and certainly no apology. I think the Ghost Adventures thing really made me feel, you know, maybe some people get some help out of these things if they're well done, but this kind of experience is not entertainment. It's not fun entertainment, you know. And these people had not read the book. I had a conversation with Dave Schrader by chance, really, on a podcast, and he was taking Zach Bagan's line on this, but neither Zach, as far as I can tell, or Dave Schrader had read Keith's book, which to me is a bit of a joke. Okay, thank you. Oh, I just got one more sure. From Ian Valentine. Should we make this the last one, Alan? Would you say?
Yep, certainly. We can make it the last question. I've actually been sitting here making a list. Some of these have come up on the chat. Some you've actually mentioned, Richard, of elements that arise in this case which appear in, or at least from my quick dip into memory bank and files, appear in other cases. So yeah, I was just going to run through it because
I'd love to have that, and I think Keith would love to have that. I'm
yeah.
more than happy to give some more time, because that's really what I've been hoping for above all.
Well, I'll share it with the meeting because I've had the benefit of what people have been putting up, what you've been saying, and sitting back and thinking about some of the ones that I've looked at myself off and on in one capacity, or the SBR has, or the Ghost Club has, or from previous lectures we've had here at the club over best part of 20 years. So yeah, but please, yeah, the next question.
It's from Ian Valentine. Did it target Tina to any significant extent, or just Keith and those associated with him? Could it be a more traditional ESP poltergeist case, in fact, centered on Tina, unwittingly causing the phenomena?
I don't think so, no, because you're, as far as I know, according to William Roll and most other experts, you've got to be fairly close to what's happening most of the time. And there's a drop-off curve, less events that once you get beyond, I don't know, 40 meters or something like that. And there was so much going on, way across America on airplanes, where Tina was perhaps thousands of miles away. In terms of persecution, attention seeking, if you like, more, they were both getting Keith, Tina, to the extent that they were going around the house saying, "What do you want? What do you want?" And neither of them had said it. Somebody was saying Tina in Tina's ear, someone was saying Keith in Keith's ear, and neither of them had actually said this. So there was that, toward Tina. In terms of her being the agent, I mean, I can see some broad logic for this with the old argument that women are more typically agents. But of course, there's nothing typical about this at all, really. They're both thoroughly the wrong age, and nothing, really seriously traumatic for either of them to the degree that you have with adolescent agents. So as far as she was persecuted, I think everything points to the fact that it was trying to break them up more to persecute Keith than anything. She certainly had a rough time, and the night when she disappeared out of the house because everything was crashing around her, she just fled. So yeah, that might have been that stuff was more likely to happen in the house, and so it happened when she was there. But I certainly think everything points to Keith having got a much harder time of it, and he's still getting a much harder time of it now, really. So I think if anything, the tension between them, the arguments between them might have produced an energy that allowed the phenomena to happen, perhaps. But I don't think that means that it was purely RSPK, unfortunately. Initially would love to have believed that. It was my only explanation way back. But I think something beyond the two of them was involved. Everything does point to that.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Well, and I must say, Richard, an absolutely fascinating case. And I get the impression here that, like some of the bigger and long-running cases, the real problem that actually researchers, anyone coming to this now, has to address is not actually the lack of evidence, but the surfeit of it. There have been so many incidents spread over so many years. It's difficult to know where to actually start. I mean, just listening to it, seeing some of the comments that have come up, and one or two you've mentioned. I mean, I've just sort of jotting down cases I was reminded of. Grey Lady apparition, Willington Mill, 1847.
Right. Okay.
Physical interference, wall writing. That's Esther Cox, Amherst Mystery, Nova Scotia, 1878. Romania, 1925-26. The Eleanor Zugan, the poltergeist girl for physical damage. You've got the destruction of Bibles, Christian objects and symbolism. That's Calcutta, 1926. Harry Price. tie up with an Indian lady witness who, and about what was going on in the family. Multiple apports. That's one down the road from John Fraser at Thornton Heath, 1938. Borley Rectory. Well, everything happened at Borley Rectory. I mean, you know, that Borley Rectory goes without saying, but there's plenty of parallels there. And then you've got case I've been looking at now, and the problem is again too much material. Is the Battersea case, 1956 to 1968, and I mean, there's already been a whole book written by James Clark and Shirley Hitchens, who was the teenage focus, and more is just keeps churning out of that case.
Right.
There's the objects, large objects, materializations again is one that Tony Cornell talked to the Ghost Club about, Hanneth Hall, 1957. The one that John Fraser and talks about and revisited in his book Pontefract, 66, the Black Monk of Pontefract case. You mentioned Matthew Manning, 1970s case investigated particularly by Dr. George Owen, who also did the Philip experiment, and Dr. Anita Gregory. Then, of course, there's Enfield, 1977, Maurice Grosse, Guy Playfair. I was being reminded of something you said, as well as maybe Beth, maybe it will help us on this one, the Humpty Doo case, Australia, 1998, particularly nasty and threatening poltergeist case. We've been spoken to in the past by Darren Ritson and Mike Hallowell, the South Shields case, 2006, interference with technology, wall writing, communication. There they attempted smudging rituals and so forth, Mike Hallowell's belief at the time. Somebody flagged up Caroline Mitchell's case, Clapton, 2010, Invisible Paranormal Intruder, the book she wrote on it as well. And yeah, altogether there's there's a whole range, and the place I'd be looking to check some more out would be Alan Gould and Tony Cornell's poltergeists.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course there's the Brazilian cases that Guy Playfair, that were quite often long-running ones. Some of the ones logged by him, and also by Brazilian researchers subsequently.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of parallels and materials there. I mean, I thought the question that Andy asked as well about language was interesting, because of course knowledge of foreign languages in a case, you know, if that starts popping up, then quite often the Catholic reaction is it's a sign of potential demonic or diabolical activity. If you get foreign languages, equally, if it's there's Alan Gould's point in his book that one of the fundamental things is how not so much the fact that it communicates or you hear it speaking English, but how does an entity with no ears actually hear anything to begin with? Because you know, we hear things because we've got ears, or we've got sophisticated audio equipment that can detect sound vibrations, but you know, an intangible, invisible, what's that got? But equally, if there's some kind of mind reading or telepathy or that going on, I mean, that opens up a whole lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, the succubus account, which is pretty vivid, and I gave the kind of version rather than the X-rated version. Sorry, I've got crossed wires, I think. The succubus accounts give bodies. I mean, they give bodies. They give very precise kiss. They give breasts, and they also give, and this is where it pushes you off the edge of the boggle threshold, I suppose. Things like scales, fins at times, but yeah, certainly the sense of precise parts of broadly female bodies, and also telepathy. Yeah, Keith realized at a certain stage that he was asking questions in his head and he was getting answers in his head. Now, it's a sort of a liminal state, it seems, with this, but I don't think you can just talk about dreams here. He was emphatic that it wasn't sleep paralysis. He's had that. It didn't feel like that. And what was the other part of it? That, yeah, the squeak of getting off the bed, you know, that there's weight here. This thing's got weight. So, yeah, ears, bodies, God knows. But there's these little tantalizing clues and fragments, you know, of corporeality that come at you.
Do you think it's a possibility that Keith himself is mediumistic?
I think Keith perhaps actually has more receptivity to this kind of thing than Tina, because he was habitually more disturbed by it. He was hearing more than she was hearing more readily, I think. There's certainly plenty of cases where they both witnessed something right in front of their eyes. They both heard something. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because he's never had any hint of this for 42 years. So I think he's more receptive to it than Tina was. But I think not that mediumistic, because they'd had they got an actual medium, Carissa Fleck there, who was really having conversations. And she was getting farther than Keith had ever got. But yeah, I think in broad terms, that's a very interesting question to explore. I've just clarified that the point where something zoomed through him, it felt euphoric. This happened to him many times afterwards. It wasn't the only time, but that first time, he wonders, and it's hard not to wonder, if something did not get hold of him at that point, that the ability to really follow him and keep following him. I don't know. I mean, it had followed him around hotels and so on before, but he certainly has had this feeling that he's got a fight, that he's really being invaded in a radical way when he's had this breath drawn out of him, his succubus experience. And he describes it as DEFCON 4 and so forth, that he's spiritually being attacked at the most absolute level. And it is interesting when you look at actual nightmare accounts, and this doesn't seem to be sleep paralysis nightmare, but you have people saying, and you have absolute atheist, materialist characters having this experience and saying, it wasn't as if it was trying to kill me. It was far more terrifying than that. It was after my soul. And these were people who didn't believe in soul, So, yeah, in terms of something really coming for him, it's been a hell of a learning curve for him, I think.
Yes, well, certainly there's the vast amount there that could be explored from many angles. I mean, it's unfortunately symptomatic of the problem that when you do get these big cases, you act rather than being left to spontaneous individual case investigators, as enthusiastic or devoted as they may be, you actually start to throw up so many questions which actually need a team of experts to address each one of them. And it's an altogether remarkable case that you've presented here, and I get the feeling, it's not having read the books, that this is just a segment of what there is.
It's really the best you can do in a short space of time. But I think if people feel overwhelmed, and I'm a bit more old school, I don't deal well with a lot of stuff coming at me on YouTube and so on. I think you can take your pick. You want to be old school, you just get hold of the books. They're very affordable, they're very available. Start at the beginning and go to the second one. But if you want the EVPs, you want to put a pair of headphones on and listen to these EVPs, there's something quite powerful about hearing those. I've heard them. You've got no trouble getting them. And I think the tremendous thing is that Keith has, unlike other victims, Caroline Mitchell did a great account. She's got police witness statements. But in the end, I corresponded with her. She didn't want to go into this much longer, and much further. And you thoroughly respect that. But Keith has been unusual and courageous, I think, in throwing a huge lot of data out there, throwing quite a lot of personal information out there, which might have been difficult for some people. And I've got to say, actually, he's been a bit surprised at the response he's had from a lot of the paranormal community. He's been a bit baffled at being ignored over and over again by people whose role, avowedly, if not quite job, is to study the paranormal. They've ignored him over and over again. He's been sending them sound files that
Mm.
you think they'd bite your head off to get hold of. So yeah, start where you like. If you want the tech stuff, you can go to that. You can go to the Kindle version of the book, I think, to use the tech stuff more easily, or you can just chase up the web links from the hard copies. But yeah, if you just want to sit down with a book, he tells a cracking story. I mean, I had to correct a lot of mistakes wherever they came from, but I was always very keen to keep Keith's voice. He's got a cracking storytelling voice, very kind of, engaging American vernacular, if you like, that really cuts through a lot of suffering with kind of fairly stoical courage, I would say. Yeah, so it's an amazing read.
Well, indeed. Well, it certainly lead me to have a look in detail at his books, being a habitual collector and reader of these things for far too many years.
Yeah.
I think it's, I mean, you said two particularly important things, I think, in the course of your talk as well. That is, first of all, this is something that I'm often trying to impress on researchers and audiences I talk to, is our principal evidence for both apparitions and poltergeists is actually eyewitness testimony. It's the people who actually experience these things are the principal source of our data and our knowledge. And there has been an unfortunate tendency to imagine, particularly in the last couple of decades, that ghost hunting is all about running around with gadgets and holding stakeouts and vigils with a high-tech array of equipment and so forth, which certainly has its place. It's important. I think it certainly can get somewhere if you're very, very fortunate, and on top of the possibility of recording. The thing, as John said in his talk last month, the thing about poltergeist activity and these physical phenomena is that they are not subjective events, in the sense that they are occurring in the physical objective world around us, and therefore they can be recorded, they can be measured to a certain extent. They leave measurable physical traces, which can be picked up and recorded by instrumentation. You mentioned Dr. Colvin and his acoustic signature work there. So, we're not dealing purely with something that can just simply be dismissed as a subjective experience or anecdotal subjectivity or hallucination or dream or any thought in their head type thing. We're talking about something that has a clear effect in the material world. And the second thing, which I think is often forgotten as well, and I've just actually written a book review for what is actually a very interesting and well-researched book, written by a Fortean called S.J. Tucker, looking at poltergeist phenomena, and he takes a novel take on the material, in the sense that he looks at it from the perspective more sort of, he gives up on trying to come up with an explanation. He talks about poltergeists being best approached through trickster mythology and joking mythology, and almost treats the subject as a source of humour, with chapters such as poltergeist slapstick and examples of lavatory humour from poltergeist. But it's a very good book on one level in terms of all the ones he's studied and gone to, but it's quite clear he's never actually investigated a case, never actually gone to witnesses firsthand or understood the actual trauma that they can experience in terms of the phenomena. And there is a very big human side here, a whole qualitative aspect to this, which is important not to forget. And that's one of the things that Guy Playfair and Maurice Grosse used to say, is that people forget that it's all very well coming up, sitting in your armchairs with all kinds of consoles with all kinds of theories, but when you're actually there with the person or listening to the raw testimony, that's a very different, you get an entirely different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I glanced at the reviews of the Tucker book, the overview of it, and I did think it did remind me of the kind of academic stuff that I was rather weary of seeing. directly or indirectly in university culture. You know, what are the cultural meanings of ghosts? And you get these very kind of third order analyses of why they might believe in this type of ghost. And the actual question that's kind of begging you, slapping you in the face, she was completely ignoring. And yet 3 of the people, close friends that told me very interesting ghost or poltergeist stories were heavyweight academics. And yeah, you've got it going on right there. I mean, probably in a university with the students, you know, a lot of students cheat by jowl, age 18 to 20 something, in quite difficult personal circumstances, as I know by some of the pastoral things I had to deal with. You've got a huge reservoir of data and analysis for poltergeist and ghost cases, perhaps especially in older buildings, you know, in older universities. Yeah, I think I weary really now. I can sympathise with it because you know, I've learned a lot quite quickly, and I sometimes forget that if my old me was talking to my present me, I just scowl and swear, and what the bloody hell are you talking about? So it's difficult. It's something that's hiding in plain sight, I guess. But we seem to have entered a period of creating a new taboo here, where a lot of old taboos are being challenged quite bravely. You know, about sexual abuse, about racism, and yet we've got this new taboo that's quite hard to challenge in a lot of areas. Yeah.
Well, on that deeply thoughtful and thought-inspiring note, I'm conscious you've been talking for an awfully long time to us now, and also all good things must come to an end, as always, including even Ghost Club meetings. Doubtless we will be continuing in our own ways this conversation on different levels and looking into some of these questions. I'll certainly be looking to the books that you recommended, but can I say on behalf of everyone who's participated, taken part this afternoon, thank you very much indeed, Richard, for a most absorbing and interesting talk. And in the best tradition of the Ghost Club and its lectures, let me say you've delivered a most fascinating and informative lecture, and one that has also, I think, certainly for me and no doubt for many others, has also succeeded in chilling the blood. So thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Many thanks to yourself and to Rob. And just to add, if anyone's got thoughts, questions, input, I'm always on Twitter, so please, and Keith also would love to have engagement. But many thanks, it's really enjoyable talk, really great afternoon. Thank you.
So thank you, and thanks again to Rob and to everyone else everyone who's participated today to make this a successful event. And to say that we're currently looking at trying to host in the UK an outdoor event in August. Finalising details for that to see if it's feasible and possible will be the next duty of the council as soon as possible. In the meantime, hopefully most of you have received the latest edition of the journal. Okay, either through email delivery or by direct delivery of a physical copy, and hopefully we may even be able to pull together a newsletter bulletin that we've managed to produce, particularly with Rob and Nigel's assistance and 1 or 2 other people's contributions. We'll hopefully get something like that going again soon. But as I said, all good things must come to an end, so I will draw this meeting of the Ghost Club to an end and say thank you once again to our speaker and to everyone who made it possible this afternoon.
Thanks to everybody.
Bye for
now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Richard.
Hi. Yes, I wasn't sure how we ended exactly. But,
people can, if you can go to bottom right hand corner to end.
Okay, sure.
And if there are any stragglers, I'll contact you either today or tomorrow, Richard.
Okay, great. But thanks very much.
Thank you. That was great.
Okay. Have a good night.
And
cheers.